Okay, I'm gonna start now. Welcome everyone to the 2022 Virtual Self-Advocacy Summit. We will be getting started shortly. Daniel, would you give the instructions to access the Spanish interpretation?
I'll be the one. This is Tanya, your other Spanish interpreter. Hi.
Awesome.
Welcome, everyone. We are providing Spanish interpretation. So if you are a monolingual English speaker, and in case we have any Spanish participant speaking at the end for any questions, you will need to select the English channel. So if you are using a computer, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a globe. You need to select the English channel. If you are using a cell phone or a tablet, you need to tap your screen. You will see 3 little dots at the bottom. Select language interpretation, select English, and then the blue button at the top that says done. That way you could hear any communication from Spanish into English. Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos a la junta de hoy. Tenemos interpretación simultánea en español para ustedes, si ustedes desean escuchar la junta en español. Si usted está utilizando una computadora, va a ver el icono de un mundo en la parte baja de su pantalla. Por favor, seleccione el canal de español. Si usted está utilizando un teléfono móvil o una tableta, tiene que tocar su pantalla, tocar los 3 puntitos en la parte de abajo, seleccionar donde dice interpretación de idioma, después seleccione español y por último en la parte de arriba un botón azul que dice done o listo para poder escuchar la junta completamente en español. Thank you very much.
And now we will play a little video for you guys and then wait for everyone to get in. Okay, I'm gonna stop it there. Awesome. Okay, and now we are gonna go again. Welcome again, everyone, to the 2022 Self-Advocacy Summit. Once again, can you give us the Spanish interpretation to give the instructions, and then I will continue and welcome us.
Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos nuevamente. Estamos proveyendo interpretación simultánea al español. Si usted necesita escuchar la junta en español, por favor vaya a la parte baja de su pantalla si usted está en una computadora y va a ver un icono de un mundo. Seleccione el canal de español. Si usted está utilizando un teléfono móvil o una tableta, tiene que tocar su pantalla y buscar los tres puntitos en la parte de abajo, en la parte derecha, seleccionar donde dice interpretación de idioma, después seleccionar español y por último en la parte de arriba el botón azul que dice done o listo para que pueda escuchar la junta completamente en español. And just as a reminder again, if in case we have any Spanish speaking participants speaking at the end when the Q&A session, you need to select the English channel. That way you will be able to hear any communication from Spanish into English. If you are using a computer, you'll see a globe at the bottom, select the English channel. If you are using a cell phone or a tablet, your options are a little different. You'll see three little dots at the bottom, select language interpretation, then select English and the blue button that says done at the top of your screen. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, welcome again, everyone, to the 2022 Self-Advocacy Summit for Youth and Young Adults with Disabilities. This summit is brought to you by Resources for Independent Central Valley, EPU Childrens Center, Central Valley Regional Center, the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, Sequoia office, and Linguistica. We welcome you to day 4 of this week-long advocacy journey where you will learn new skills to add to your toolbox and have the opportunity to receive valuable information at the virtual resource fair. The information from the virtual resource fair has been sent out to the email that you registered with, and we encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity to mingle during the last session with afternoon from 3:30 to 5:30 with organizations that are here to support you. We would like to thank the team at EPU for hosting the Zoom webinar platform today, the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Service Center for providing ASL interpreters for this event, and the Healthy House Merced for their Spanish interpretation services. A few housekeeping items. The chat box has been disabled. If you have questions or comments, please pop them into the Q&A. If you need to voice your questions or comments, please raise your hand and you will be called on when it is appropriate. Live captioning has been enabled for your convenience. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first presentation for today. Here to present voting accessibility rights and advocacy is Sarah Harris, RICV Director of Programs, James Fresno County Clerk and Registrar of Voters, along with Carrie Liu and Paul Spencer, attorneys with Disability Rights, California. I'm going to hand it off to Sarah now.
Awesome. Thank you, Chloe. And thank you, Linguistica, for your Spanish interpretation. We really appreciate it. All right, so hello everybody. As Chloe said, my name is Sarah Harris. I'm the Director of Programs here at Resources for Independent Central Valley. In addition, I am a huge advocate for voting rights and access. And I feel very honored today to have joining me here on this virtual stage. I have James Coos, who is the Fresno County Clerk and Registrar of Voters. I have Carrie Liu and Paul Spencer, who are attorneys with Disability Rights California, and I'm going to give them a second to introduce themselves a little bit further. So in no particular order, Carrie, you go first.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was hoping you wouldn't pick me first, Sarah.
I know you.
I'm Carrie Liu. I'm an attorney at Disability Rights California, and I'm really thrilled to be here today. In my role as an attorney and in other roles, I have worked on youth development, and I love working with younger people and helping them think about how to access the world around them. Glad to be here.
Awesome, awesome. James.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Coos, Fresno County Clerk, Registrar of Voters. I've been in the position now for just over a year, although I've recently been re-elected for the next 4 years. It's one of those yay things. But I've actually been working in elections and working with accessibility in elections for a better part of a decade now. So almost 10 years ago was the first time that I went out, and as I'll talk about later, and did an ADA survey for Fresno County. So this is something I've been doing personally, but the county's been working on to ensure accessible elections for years and years. So I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk about that today.
Awesome. Thank you, James. And last but definitely not least, Mr. Paul Spencer.
And hi, I'm Paul. I'm an attorney with Disability Rights California also. I use he, him pronouns. So I work with Carrie, and I've collaborated with James over the years on accessible voting. And we're definitely going to talk about how you can vote privately and independently. One thing I'll touch on too is that it's not just voting. It's also you could volunteer on a campaign. You could work as a poll worker. There's people with disabilities that work for politicians on their staff. So there's a lot of options you have to get involved in democracy. So looking forward to the presentation, and it's always really nice to be invited to these events to speak. So I'll hand it back to Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. And James, my first question goes to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how Fresno County takes the steps to ensure accessible voting for its voters?
Of course, I'd be happy to. First off, a big thing, accessible voting is very important across the state of California. And we continue to be innovative in the national landscape. And one of those innovations that has been brought in over the last 5-6 years is actually the Voters' Choice Act, an optional system where a county can provide voting in a fashion that really gives options to the voters. And many of those options are specifically designed to be accessible or to expand accessible access. Fresno County is a participant in the Voters' Choice Act, and that means we have about 50 vote centers, centralized locations where voters can go vote, and you're not assigned to go a specific place anymore. You can go anywhere that is convenient for you. Every one of those vote centers has a minimum of 3 physical, accessible, in-person voting devices, and every vote center is surveyed to ensure that it is accessible beforehand. That's kind of why I mentioned I've spent a decade doing that personally. Not quite able to do that anymore personally. I've got staff for that now, but we double check every location. And that's true across the state, but it's even more important at our vote centers under the Voters' Choice Act. Now, that's not all we do. We also make sure that those vote centers are accessible via transit. So public transit, and also accessible in Fresno County, that's Handy Ride. And we've got the opportunity for voters to get there in person, but we also provide at-home accessible options. Now, we do mail a ballot to every active voter in Fresno County, but you could argue, and plenty of people have, that's not necessarily accessible to everyone. So we offer another opportunity for voters in Fresno County called Remote Accessible Vote by Mail. And this is an opportunity where you can actually request that we send you your ballot in an electronic format so that you can use your own accessibility device at home. So you're able to independently vote at home and then return that ballot to us. There's always a paper ballot that does need to be returned. You can't vote electronically right now. There's just too many security concerns with that, but we're there to help you go through that voting process and ensure that you can do that independently, whether you want to do that in person at a vote center or at home using your own devices that you are comfortable with. Now, one thing I really should note is this isn't something that we've jumped out there and done kind of like willy-nilly, oh, this is what I want to do. This is actually something that we've done in consultation with the people of Fresno County. We've had multiple committees that have actually recommended and told us what the community wants. And we had a couple big ones. One of them was our VCA Advisory Committee. And another one that we have ongoing at all times is our Voting Accessibility Advisory Committee.
Oh, thank you so much, James. And we do have a very active Voters Accessibility Advisory Committee here in Fresno, I must say. And so I'm wondering, Carrie, could you take a minute and tell us more about what exactly a Voters Accessibility Advisory Committee is and what it does and how you can find out if you have one?
Hi again, everyone. This is Carrie, and I'd be happy to take more than a minute to talk about voting accessibility advisory committees, because I want to let you know what they are and how you could get involved if you're interested. So a common acronym you'll see for a voting accessibility advisory committee is VAC, V-A-A-C. So if I use the word VAC, I'm referring to that. And a VAC is a group of people from the public and from the county elections office or the state elections office. And the members of the VAC can make recommendations to the government officials who are responsible for elections about how they can improve the accessibility of voting for people with disabilities. So you might wonder, what types of things does a VAC talk about? What things can you improve? Well, it's pretty much any aspect of the voting experience that the committee wants to talk about. You can talk about in-person voting. You can talk about voting by mail. James just talked about the remote accessible vote by mail. You could talk about how that system is working. You can talk about elections materials, such as those mailed ballots, the materials that county and state elections officials will send to you as a voter to inform you about voting. You could talk about the government elections website, what's on it, how navigable it is. You could talk about the ways that elections officials communicate with the public about voting. So really, anything you want to talk about related to voting, my experience has been that elections officials welcome that input from people with disabilities. And I want to emphasize that your lived experience as a person with disabilities is valuable. You can offer your perspective and your insights to influence how elections are administered in your county or maybe even the entire state. And you can help make voting more accessible for yourself and other people in really concrete ways. Even the most thoughtful and well-meaning elections officials might not thought of the ideas that you have to offer. So that's why your input is so valuable. I think of one example of a newer elections official who learned for the first time about what it means for an in-person voting location to be accessible to people with physical disabilities. And she later reflected to us on the VAC that it changed how she looks at all physical spaces. So your input, if you join a VAC, could be similarly powerful. You could forever change how the people responsible for elections think about disabilities and think about accessibility. And then another benefit I thought of is that it would give you a chance to connect with other people, including government officials and other advocates who are passionate about voting. And that can feel really good. So does your county have a VAC? I know we have 12 counties represented at this summit. There are certain counties that are required to have a VAC. James mentioned a moment ago, Voters' Choice Act. So every Voters' Choice Act county has to have a VAC. And there are 6 of them that are represented by this summit. I'll just mention them in case you're in one of them. Fresno, Kings, Madera, Mariposa, Merced, and Ventura counties are all Voters' Choice Act counties, and all of them have VACs. So if you're in one of those counties, you could join the VAC. Other counties that are not Voters' Choice Act counties don't have to have a VAC, but they're encouraged to. And I can say that 4 of the 6 non-Voters' Choice Act counties represented by this summit do have VACs as well. Those are Kern, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Tulare. So the 2 other counties, Inyo and Mono, don't have a VAC, but I would say that means they don't have a VAC yet. I actually talked to the registrar of voters for Inyo County the other day, and when talking to her about whether they have a VAC yet, she said no, but by the end of our conversation, she had expressed an interest in creating one. So if you're in Inyo County, you can reach out to me or Paul after the summit, and we can help connect you with the registrar of voters there if you'd be interested. And similarly, if you're in Mono County, sorry, there's not a VAC yet. But if you want to advocate to create one, then there are ways to do that. And then I wanted to mention as well that there is a VAC at the California state level as well. That's organized under the California Secretary of State. Members there are appointed by the Secretary of State. Even if your county doesn't have a VAC, voting is still required to be accessible to people with disabilities. Not having a VAC simply means that the county doesn't have a formal way yet of getting feedback about elections from people with disabilities. So how to get involved, my last part for now, you're going to get a handout after the summit, and that will have webpage links, email addresses, and phone numbers for each of those 12 counties. And if you want to learn more, you can reach out to the county elections officials directly, or if you need help connecting with the county, or you want to have help trying to get a VAC started in your county, that's one of the things that you can reach out to Disability Rights California's voting hotline, and we can see if we can help you.
Awesome, awesome. And I just really quickly want to thank Carrie for putting together handouts for you all to get after today's session. They're really, really great. So thank you again, Carrie. So one of the really cool things that Disability Rights California has is their statewide voter hotline. And Paul, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd love to, Sarah. So Disability Rights California, our voting team, we run a free hotline for voters with disabilities for every election. And voters can call in and ask questions or get help. So you're going to get a handout with the phone number on it. Again, I want you to know it's free. One thing that's kind of different, like, I'm a little older and like I'm used to kind of calling hotlines for help if I need something. But, if folks in this training, you're a little younger, you're kind of used to, you can instant message something or you can look for an answer on the internet. So you might be a little less familiar with calling a hotline for help, but it's a good way to do things, especially on an election if you're struggling to find information for elections. So, the number, which is going to be in the handout, it's 888-569-7955. So one nice thing about our hotline is it's fully staffed around elections. So it's usually a live human. It's going to answer. It's probably Carrie or myself or one of our colleagues. And we're going to be able to give you advice. And, if you're really experiencing a barrier to voting because of your disability, we'll help you resolve it. Our goal is to try to make sure that you're able to vote before polls close. And we did have a question in the chat about, when is the deadline you have to vote by? So, typically election day, it's always a Tuesday and polls close at 8 o'clock. So, you either need to be there in person before 8 o'clock, or you need to have mailed in your ballot and have it postmarked by that day, or you need to have dropped it off at one of the voting locations. And, sometimes navigating those issues and figuring out what to do, it can be tough. There is decent information on county elections websites, but sometimes it can be hard to find. I'm not going to give James a hard time because the Fresno website does answer questions pretty well. But sometimes your county website, it might be difficult to find the answers you're looking for, or especially answers for how you can vote with a disability privately and independently. So that information is on the Secretary of State's website, but I do suggest you call if you have questions. Another thing about the hotline is, probably half our calls are questions that people have about how to vote. But then a fair number are people that are experiencing some sort of barrier and they need help navigating it. So like one issue might be is you're allowed to do something called curbside voting. So you can show up in your car to a voting location and you can have a ballot brought out to you. But one issue can be like, let's say it's on election night and it's crowded in the parking lot. It can be difficult to get the attention of the election workers inside. So, we've had people call our hotline and then we've called the county elections office on your behalf to get them to send an election worker out to help you. Another issue sometimes we run into is, let's say an individual who's blind wants to use the accessible voting system in the voting location. So, that's basically like a big iPad, if you've never voted in person, that has accessible technology that would allow you, for example, to listen to audio of the ballot so you could vote privately and independently if you were blind. It actually works for a lot of people with disabilities. It's available to everyone at the location. You don't have to have a disability. But as you can imagine, if you're a person with a disability, for some disabilities, that's your best way to vote privately and independently at a location. And if that equipment's broken, that's a problem. So, you could call our hotline and we'll try to help you resolve it. It could be something as having the county bring more voting equipment to your location, or it could be advising you to go somewhere nearby, or even helping with some troubleshooting to the election workers. The one thing about this, I don't want to scare you. Voting equipment in California, in the last couple of years, all counties have brand new voting equipment, so it's less buggy than it used to be. And if you want to talk about bugs, Sarah can help you. She's run into some bugs with voting equipment in the past. So it has happened, but it's less likely to happen now. So I don't want to scare you, but please, call our hotline if you're experiencing a barrier. You're also welcome to call your county elections office. They run hotlines too. The issue is that they're running an election that day, and sometimes they're getting a ton of phone calls. So it can actually be easier to call our hotline if you have a disability-related question. And yeah, that's it. One last thing about our hotline is, our hotline actually runs year-round. Most people call us on election day or in the days before election day, but we have the hotline up and running always. So it is a resource you can call. If you're having some other issue with voter registration, it's something we can help you with. So it's there. It's just, it can be very, very busy on elections, but typically we're always able to answer your call and we'll give you a call right back. We really want to make sure that you're able to vote before polls close. And just in closing, when you're a registered voter, you're going to get a vote by mail ballot in the mail about a month before the election. So, if you have questions about how to complete your ballot, or if you have questions about your signature, that can be something to call our hotline too. So unsurprisingly, we've been getting a lot of phone calls now, weeks before the election, whereas we used to get most of our calls on election day. And a lot of that is because now in California, we're sending all voters a vote by mail ballot. So once you're registered, don't be surprised. You should be getting that in the mail. But that's a good summary of our hotline. And you're also, again, going to get a handout with the hotline number and some instructions for how to use it. But I think I'll hand it back to Sarah for our next, to move on to our next question.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. And you're right. The machines have gotten a whole lot less buggy. And I do want to add in an extra thing that we didn't think about sharing. So the other cool thing with the Voters' Choice Act is that if you're a county that's part of the Voters' Choice Act, you're also supposed to do a voters accessibility workshop. And that is definitely a time where you can, come out and learn how to use the machines, learn more about the process and everything. James and myself and other election staff, we have put on a few of those. And so next time we do it and you're in Fresno County, please make sure to come out and join us for sure. So we have a few tools now under our belt. We have the knowledge that voting should be accessible for everybody, right? And that we are able to vote independently and privately is a very important right for us to have. We know that there's a Voters Accessibility Advisory Committee in most counties, but not all, but all that have the Voters' Choice Act are required to have them. And then we also know that at the end of the day, if we have more questions, the DRC has a statewide voter hotline for us to call and ask away anything that we have going on in our head about voting rights, which I think is amazing. And so with that being said, James, what about voter registration? How does somebody vote, or how does somebody sign up to vote? How early can they do so? How do you check your voter registration?
All wonderful questions, Sarah. It is your responsibility to register to vote. If you want to participate, and I really encourage everyone out there to participate, it is one of your rights. Really, I think your responsibility to get your voice heard out there and vote. But in California, you must register first. And it is also your responsibility to make sure that you maintain your registration, that you keep it up to date. How do you register? Well, you can go just about any of our public buildings and get a paper copy of the registration. And someone can help you fill that out. If you want, you can fill it out yourself. You can always return that to our department or any registrar's office across the state, but really easily, you can mail it back for free. No stamp necessary. You just put it in the mail, you fold it up, put it in half, and put it in the mail, and it gets returned for free. There's also online registration. So you can actually go to the California Secretary of State's website and you can register there. Just about every county website, so example, my county website, which is votefresnocounty.com, has a link to that online registration process, links to the Secretary of State's office. And there you can go online, use your own computer, use your own phone or tablet, and you can actually do your registration there. You can also register now at the DMV. And within the next year or two, even at several other public state and county organizations, when you do any type of electronic action with the DMV, they're going to ask whether you want to update your registration, or if you're new, say you just turned 18 and you're getting your driver's license, well, they're going to ask whether you want to get registered to vote. You can actually register even before that, online or through paper, as early as 16. We have programs where we go out to our high schools and do that pre-registration process. And that way you can be registered, and our computer automatically makes you a live registrant ready to vote when you turn 18. How do you know what your status is? We go back to the Secretary of State's website and you can look up yourself. Are you registered to vote? Is your address correct? Is the party listed your correct party? Not so important this year, but very important in 2024 when we have the presidential election, which is based on the party system. So a lot of information for you to check there. You can update your registration at any time, either using that paper registration that I mentioned earlier, or online where it takes effect just about instantly, which is a great thing. And even if you forget to get registered, we'll help you to register in person at our vote centers. It's a major improvement in the voting process to help voters out that the Voters' Choice Act first started and which now actually applies across the state. We can do in-person, same-day voter registration. You can register at a vote center and we will give you a ballot right there. You will have to fill out paperwork, but you can do that there. We get you a ballot, it goes into an envelope and gets double checked because there's always security involved. Beginning this year, someone who wants to use the remote accessible vote by mail system, or who is an overseas or military voter, can also do same-day registration. So we've expanded that process as well. There's still some steps you have to go through to verify who you are and to acknowledge why you're using that system, but lots of opportunities for you to register in California. Really no excuse not to get registered and get involved. It's time to get that opportunity to get involved there. Back to you, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you, James. See, lots of good information there. And I have a question to tag on to that. So when you look up yourself, are you also able to see when the last election you voted in was, like if it got tabulated? Is that another thing that you can do?
So when you look yourself up, it will actually give you some information during an election. Mm-hmm. But you can go a little further than that. And we now have a means by which you can track your ballot. And again, this is through the California Secretary of State's website. You can track your ballot there through a process called Ballot Tracks. And when you sign up there, you will receive notifications. It's your choice how you get those. They could be by text, by phone, by email. And you'll find out when your ballot is mailed to you, when you have returned your ballot, and when your ballot has been counted.
Very cool. It's like Domino's. When you order a pizza, you know when it's being cooked and when it's being put in the box, and haha. Thank you, James. Thank you. All right, so we know that we have the right to have accessible access to a independent and private vote. We now know how to register or to check our registration, and we know how to advocate. We can do that by calling the hotline with DRC. We can do that by joining a Voters Accessibility Advisory Committee. So, but how do we find information that we can trust to learn about what's on the ballot? Carrie, Paul, you have any answers for us?
Thanks, Sarah. So this is Carrie. Paul and I are going to tag team our answer to this one. So that's a really great and a really important question about finding trusted sources of information. And I'll just start by saying it's really sad that there are some people who unintentionally spread misinformation about elections. And it's also really sad that there are other people who intentionally spread disinformation, wrong information about elections. So that's the sad part, but thankfully there are trustworthy sources of information. You just need to make some effort to ensure that you're looking at those trusted sources of information and not looking at the untrustworthy ones. So Paul and I are going to talk about 4 main sources of trustworthy, nonpartisan information. And if you don't know what nonpartisan mean, that means that it's not skewed toward one of the political parties or another. So Paul and I are going to go over types of information you can look at. It's going to be a lot of information. Just know that this is another thing where you're going to get a handout that will have links to where you can find the information we're talking about. So the 2 types of good sources of reliable, nonpartisan information I'm going to talk about are the ones that come directly from your elections officials. Those are the County Voter Information Guide and the State Voter Information Guide. As the names suggest, one comes from your county elections officials and one comes from the state election agency. For those of you who are able to see me on the screen, I have examples of my own. So this is an example of a county voter information guide. It's a little booklet and it's got information in it that I'll tell you about. Mine's from Tuolumne County. And then what I'm showing on screen now is an example of the state voter information guide. It's larger and it's much longer. They both have a lot of really important, good information in there for you. So they go into detail about how, where, and when you can vote. They have information about candidates. So they'll list the candidates and they'll have some statements from candidates if the candidates choose to pay to put a statement in the voter information guide. The county one will have information about local ballot measures. The state one will have information about state ballot measures. And one other thing I want to highlight that appears in the state voter information guide is what's called the Voter Bill of Rights. And this is the example that I'm showing on screen right now from the primary election that we just had last month. It's the very first page behind the cover, and it lists all your rights as a voter. So if you're interested in learning them, you can take a look at that. So how do you get these 2 things? They're generally mailed to all active registered voters. So going back to what James said earlier, you've got to register before you can vote. You also need to register before you're going to get mailed all of these things. There are some exceptions to mailing, so voters can opt out of getting the paper and instead ask to get electronic versions. And also, if you don't register to vote far enough in advance, then they might not have time to send you these guides. And then the one other thing I wanted to mention about the state guide, and you'll see links to these in your handout, is there are PDF versions and audio versions of the state voter information guide online in English and in certain non-English languages. The audio version has files that you can live stream or you can download and listen on your own device. And it also, on the Secretary of State's website, has forms where you can request large print versions of the paper voter information guide. And also, if you're a person who still uses compact discs, CDs, you can get audio on CD. So I'll hand over to Paul to talk about some other sources of information.
I was muted, sorry. So thanks, Carrie. So the resources Carrie talked about are great. They're really helpful. And you should get them in the mail. You can access them online. But I'm gonna talk to you about some hacks and some easier resources to use that are that I like, that are a little more user-friendly than some of the guides Carrie was talking about. So my favorite I want to talk about is called the Easy Voter Guide. It's available online, and you can also get a printed copy mailed to you too, or you can sometimes pick them up at different locations. So the Easy Voter Guide has a very kind of cheesy name, but it's exactly that. It's the Easy Voter Guide. So they basically take, and I'm holding up the voter information guide that, well, you can't really see it because I've got the blur on, that Carrie had, which is like, I don't know, it has size 11 font. It's not as easy to read as the Easy Voter Guide. So the Easy Voter Guide, it's nonpartisan. So they don't have an opinion on how you should vote, and they give you both sides, but they really help you break down, you know, what's going to be on the ballot, and that's what I use to kind of make a plan. So especially, you know, one thing on the ballot, if you've never voted before in California, it's not just candidates you're voting for. There's also ballot propositions, which is like, you know, proposition 13, you know, are you going to vote yes or no? And I'll admit it gets confusing. So that's why I use the Easy Voter Guide, because like they'll have the pros and the cons for each proposition, and they can help you make a decision on how you want to vote. So again, I really like the Easy Voter Guide. It's free, it's online, and the organization that puts it together makes one for every election, every big statewide election. Another sort of related thing you can use, and this is also online, it's called Voters. So Voters Edge will actually tell you everything that's going to be on your ballot. And the reason that happens is because, you know, even if you live in the same city as someone else, your ballot's probably going to look a little different because you're in different precincts. So, you know, for example, you're both going to be voting for our US Senate because you both live in the state of California. But, you know, you might be voting for different community college trustees or some races that are further down the ballot, depending on where you live. So the cool thing about Voters Edge is you put in your address and it'll pull up everything that's going to be on your ballot. And then you can use that to kind of help you make up your mind. One other thing about these resources is you don't have to memorize what you're going to vote for, or like, for example, if you're going to go vote in person, you can make yourself a cheat sheet. You could bring these materials into the voting location to help you remember how you want to vote. So you have these options. The other thing, if you're going to vote your vote by mail ballot at home, or you're going to use the remote accessible vote by mail ballot, is you can have these resources up on your computer or your smartphone while you're filling out your ballot. So again, this isn't like a history test where you have to remember everything you're going to vote for. You don't have to remember it. It's okay, materials and cheat sheets with you. And so again, if you take away anything from this, you should get the materials for free. And if you're still unsure, check out the Easy Voter Guide online. That's probably my favorite resource for voting in California. And then just in closing, you know, there's other resources too. You can use the newspapers often have editorials for what they think is the right way to vote. So there's some other resources online. You have a trusted news source that you like, that can be helpful. And heck, we're all on social media. You're going to get tons of stuff on social media for how you should vote on things. But, you know, weigh it with a critical eye. You know, look at those social media ads, look at the TV ads you're seeing, and then sort of weigh it against what you're seeing in the Easy Voter Guide. And, you know, you can kind of make up your own mind for how you want to vote, especially, again, the ballot propositions get really tricky. And oftentimes, you know, the advertising is a little different than the kind of what you read in the Easy Voter Guide. So I think that's helpful to kind of help you decide how you want to vote. So that's what I had on the resources. I hope that's helpful.
Oh, that is absolutely super helpful. And I like all those resources as well. And it's really nice if you take the time to look at all of them. because then you can, have some different, have the same thing being said, but in different ways to be able to make an even more informed decision.
Thanks,
So what do you
Sarah.
think, guys? Yeah.
Should we talk about Sarah, can we talk about endorsements a little bit too? Just kind of help explain
Yeah.
like how an endorsement works or what is an endorsement?
Oh, I think that would be great. That's a great idea. Go for it, Paul.
Okay, I'll let Carrie start on the endorsements.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So Paul kind of started talking about endorsements already. So we were focusing again in most of our comments on this question on nonpartisan sources of information. Endorsements are different from that. The types of information we were talking about sought to be very balanced and objective. Endorsements are people's opinions on how they think you should vote. So, and you might get bombarded with this information over social media, in your actual physical mailbox, on the radio, if you listen to that, on TV. So people will say, vote for a certain candidate. People will say that they think you should vote for or against a ballot measure, right? Paul was talking about propositions earlier. They're normally, proposition with a number, they'll call it prop something. So just know that those are people's opinions on how you should vote. Paul mentioned newspaper editorial boards will do them. Political parties definitely do endorsements and try to sway your vote to persuade you. And lots of advocacy and interest groups will try to persuade you that you should vote in the way they think you should vote. So the really important takeaway from that is that you're going to be bombarded with this information, and you need to decide for yourself whether you trust the source of the endorsement. So some things I think about when I'm evaluating it is, does the endorsement seem to be based on a rigorous fact-based analysis? Does the source of information have a reputation for honesty? Does the source of that endorsement, do I share values with them? So I would encourage you to think about those things for yourself when you're thinking about whether you would like to vote in the way an endorsement would have you vote.
Another thing, since hopefully you're going to be registered now ahead of time and not at the last minute. So the advantage of being registered ahead of time is you're going to get campaign mailers and you're going to get information sent to your house, which I think is a good thing. Like if you're getting the campaign mailers, that means people want your vote. So, I mean, to me, that's kind of exciting. And it's also a good way to check that you are registered, that you're getting stuff in the mail. But like, for example, if you're registered with a political party, that political party is probably going to send you a mailer that says, these are all the candidates we endorsed, which can be helpful. Probably when I get that mailer, I agree with, maybe 90% of the people on there. So it does help me make up my mind. But, taking it with a grain of salt, looking at that endorsement, I'm reading the newspaper, I'm looking at Voter's Edge, I'm looking at the Easy Voter Guide, taking into account some of the social media ads I've seen and some of the TV ads. Maybe if you can go to a debate and you can see the candidates speak, I think that's always really helpful. And heck, you might have a campaign worker knock on your door that wants you to vote a certain way. I think it's always fun to ask them questions to see, and they can help answer questions for you. You can go to candidate forums. You can go to candidates' websites themselves. So there's a lot of ways you can get information for how you want to vote. But again, like Carrie said, got to do a fact-based analysis. Is it sources you trust? You can always talk to friends and family too and get their opinions on things, and make up your own decision. It's your vote. But anyway, there's a lot of ways you can get information for how you should vote and to help make up your mind. So I hope that was helpful.
That was incredibly helpful. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm thinking let's open it up for questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and pop it in the Q&A. If you need to voice your question, you can raise your hand. And Jordan and Aubrey, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. There are some questions that have been answered, but I want to read them out loud just so then everyone has a chance to hear how it was answered. So someone asked, what happened if you don't vote on the vote date? Can you still vote? And James answered, voting usually begins 29 days before Election Day, and you may vote your ballot any day between then and Election Day. Your ballot must be returned by 8 p.m. on Election Day. They can accept vote by mail ballots after Election Day, but only if the envelope was postmarked no later than Election Day. So if you have a follow-up question about that, please utilize the Q&A. A next question was, how can I get connected with the Kern County Vac? They again answered that question as well. And I also sent a follow-up email with the information just in case they can't read it or can't access it via the Q&A. And then another question was, how early can you vote? And again, this was answered on Election Day. All in-person locations in California are open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. Before Election Day, times are different in each county. And then another question that has been answered was, what is a proposition when it comes to voting? And James answered, a proposition is a law that voters get to decide upon at the state level. Propositions begin as either initiatives presented by a voter of the state, who then collected many signatures to get it on the ballot or as a law the legislator wants to pass, but the California Constitution requires that voters make the final decision. So those were questions that were asked and answered. And then we have 2 comments as well. Someone said that their county of San Bernardino has a VAC, and they're happy because even though they have a disability, they're still able to utilize their voice by voting. And also they said, Sarah, great job in the city council meeting this morning. And then the second comment was, a public official came to me when I got the legal age of voting, and I happily voted for the president for the first time 2 years ago. And then this upcoming gubernatorial, I don't know what that word is, will be his first election that he will be participating in. I don't know if I said it.
That's for the governor, the election for the governor.
Okay, it says.
It's a funny word, James.
Gubernatorial.
There we go. I'm like, I stumble all over it too. Don't worry.
So thank you.
It's a funny word.
Me something new today. So
this is Paul speaking. What James said, I agree. For registering, don't forget, even if you're 16 or 17, you can pre-register to vote. And then when you turn 18, you're automatically registered. So that's a really cool thing to take advantage of. It's relatively new in California. So I really encourage, just in case you were 16 and you're like, this doesn't concern me for a couple of years. It does now. So please register to vote. Oh, one other thing for registration that James mentioned. So yes, you can register at the DMV. Also, so agencies that serve people with disabilities, like independent living centers, DDS, regional centers, like if you're accessing any public service or public benefits, you should also get a voter registration opportunity there. So like, for example, if you're applying for financial aid for college, you're gonna get an opportunity to register to vote. And, James doesn't want to hear this, but if you do register to vote again when you're already registered, nothing bad's gonna happen. It's maybe a little more work for James, I get it, for registrars, but they don't really care. So my point is like, if you can't remember if you're registered or not, and you don't have your smartphone and you can't look yourself up online to check your registration, there's no harm in re-registering to vote. Nothing bad happens there. So, especially if you're at the DMV and you're kind of stressed out because you just failed your written test once and now you're retaking it again or something like that, the voter registration questions are going to show up. And you can go ahead and re-register and update your information. My point is that you don't really need to overthink the registration, but just make sure you're actually registered. And like James said, worst case, you forgot to register, you can still register up to election day in person by going to a voting location in California. but that's not ideal. You want to be registered ahead.
I have no problem with that. My office has no problem with that. I want you to be properly registered. So if you have any questions about it, go ahead and register again. All it'll do, if the information is the same, we're just going to say that, hey, on this date, you verified your information. And if you have new information, well, that is something I absolutely want to hear. And so I very much encourage that. I would like to say that the online opportunities are a wonderful way to check and update your registration information, but we'd also like every once in a while that you do a paper registration, because California is now an all-mail vote ballot state. We mail every active registered voter a vote by mail ballot. And that means that a lot of people are returning their vote by mail ballot as their way of voting. And every one of those envelopes that gets returned, you must sign for it to count. And we're going to compare that envelope signature to your registration signature. And usually, not all the time, but usually, a paper signature that you filled out on one of those paper registration cards is going to be clearer and more like your signature on the envelope than what you might do in an electronic format at, for example, the DMV, where you have to use one of those electronic signature get and capture devices. So feel free to register multiple times, give us multiple bits of information. We always can help use that to verify your signature to help your ballot count, because that's what we want to make sure happens here. We want your vote to count.
That's really helpful, James. And this is Paul speaking again. Just one last thing on the signatures. You know, we don't need to go too into the weeds about the signatures, but my point is, like, you all are young adults. You know, you got to start having a consistent signature. You know, I'm 40 and I don't really have a consistent signature all the time. And especially like if I'm signing the electronic pad at the DMV, I'm like, it's really hot. I want to get out of here. And I sign it as fast as I can. But be careful. You know, you really want to start having a consistent signature, especially for the purposes of voting. Because if you turn in that vote by mail ballot, you know, they're comparing the signatures they have on file for you. One thing just as a backup, you know, James also mentioned Ballot Tracks, where you can get an email or a text message to confirm your ballot. That's a really cool service to sign up for. It gives you some peace of mind. It also will alert you if for some reason your signature didn't match and the elections office needs you to give another signature. So yes, they send you something in the mail, but it's just a lot easier to get a text message for that, and it's a lot faster. So please sign up for Ballot Tracks. It's a cool service. It's not, no, they're not going to spam you after the election or anything. It's definitely worth signing up for.
Awesome. And then Jordan, do we have any other questions?
Yes, so there's two more. The first one is, what is a VAC when it comes to elections, voting, and all that?
Gary, do you want to continue your description of the VAC there, or do you want me to jump in from the process side of it?
Yeah, hi, this is Carrie. I wonder if the person who wrote that question might have joined us late. I spoke for several minutes about that. James, if you want to give a quick summary of it, I'd be happy to have that. And then whoever posted that is welcome to call Disability Rights California's voting hotline if they want to talk more about it. We can spend time one-on-one.
I'll tell you, our VAC is a wonderful resource for us to get feedback from specifically about accessibility, voters with disabilities, and how we provide our voting opportunities. So with our VAC, we actually went through and looked at the machines that were available when we were purchasing our current election system and voting system. We actually had our VAC involved in that. Sarah actually was one of the members that was there and tested and really kind of beat up the salesman a little bit to make sure that our machines were accessible to as many people as possible. Then we discuss all the time what's going on with our vote centers, how we make them more accessible, how do we communicate, how do we set up meetings to give opportunities for anyone in the community, but in particular voters with disabilities, to be able to come in and work with those machines and have an opportunity to become comfortable with the voting process. And so it's really a great opportunity to get for us to get feedback and to find out when we should be including additional information into our county voter information guide, which Carrie mentioned and has been lobbying me for a page in there. And yes, you are going to be one of the pages. It may not take quite all of them, but you are one of our pages, Carrie. Don't worry.
Awesome, thank you. And Jordan, how about our last question?
Okay, well, we actually have two more. So, and they're actually answering these two in the chat, but someone asked, do they have to re-register if they move states? And short answer is yes, because you want to know where your address is to send you the ballot. And then the next one was, can you ask for a new ballot when you lose your previous one? And Carrie said, yes, you can contact your county elections office and say you need a replacement ballot. And then you can also request another ballot if you made a mistake, so long as you didn't already cast your vote.
Even if you spilled coffee on it and your dog ate it, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So in closing, I really want to thank all of you, James and Carrie and Paul, for coming and hanging out and doing this with me for our youth. And I want to thank all the youth for being engaged and asking all these great questions. And I know we're looking forward to, in the next couple of months, putting something else together, in terms of talking about voting and elections. So I do encourage you to reach out to me at RICV. My email address is sharris, SHARRIS, @ricv.org. So that way you can get some information on that as we put it together. Any final last words from any of our panelists?
Oh, I just yawned. Sorry. I was just to say thank you, Sarah. Thank you for inviting us. This is fun. It's really nice to talk with you all, and I appreciate all the questions.
Harry, when I was thinking about how I'd want to sum up, here's one of the messages I wanted to communicate to all of you. So you've learned today there are laws and there are people protecting your right to vote. And we've told you about some of the most important resources, including elections officials, Disability Rights California. You can contact me or Paul or our little team. We also told you about sources of trustworthy information. So knowing that you have these rights and these protections and these resources, I call on you to make good use of them. So whether you like how things are going and you want more of the same, or you're looking for a change, just remember your vote matters.
Oh, what a good call to action. How are you going to follow that, James?
Well, I'm going to say that it's my job to make sure that you have the opportunity to vote. But it is your responsibility, your opportunity to get out there and vote. I can't make you do it. I try to make it as easy as possible. I try to give you as much information as possible. Our doors are open for just days, hours, weeks for you to come down and vote, or to call us and get the information that we can help you to vote. But if you don't participate, your voice can't be heard. And I just get a little frustrated that I mailed you something and you didn't take your opportunity. So please go out there and vote. And I look forward to seeing all of your ballots this November. As long as you're in Fresno.
Really, because if you're someplace else, that could be a bad thing. Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you again, everybody. And Jordan, I'm going to hand it over to you or Aubrey to go ahead and launch our poll, and then it'll be back to Chloe. So thank you, everybody.
All right, here we go. We're launching it. So same 4 questions every time. Okay, we got 73% participation. So I'm gonna give you guys another 20 seconds. Okay, about 5 seconds. All right, thank you, everyone. All right, Chloe, I'm gonna hand the floor back to you.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you again so much. And at this time, I would like to introduce Lisa and Sophia. And these are our next speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to you guys.
Hello, this is Lisa Navarro, and my colleague is Sophia Traxler, and we have come together to bring you some information that we think would be valuable in self-advocacy in healthcare. I believe I've been with this agency for a while doing advocacy work. And so this is something that's interesting, I believe, and very dear to my heart. And go ahead, Sophia, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Sophia Trexler. I work for the Peer Self-Advocacy Unit at Disability Rights California.
So I will start us off. We are sharing a PowerPoint to help us. We've thought about points that we could share with you, and we wanted to use them in order for us to organize our thoughts with you. And we will try to do so very efficiently. And as you know, you can ask questions and place it into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or your phone. So we'll start with the next slide. So as you know, we're disability rights, and what disability rights does is defends, advances, and strengthens the rights and opportunities of people with disabilities. Next slide. During this training, we would request that you refrain from any confidential questions, because nothing will be confidential while we're doing this as a webinar. And if you do have something confidential that you would like to discuss, you can contact our intake line, and that number is 800-776-5746. Next slide. So during this training, this is what we want to talk about. Healthcare rights, finding the right provider, and communicating with your provider. Next slide. So, Sophia will start talking to us about healthcare rights.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to be talking about is the California Mental Health Parity Act. So this covers mental health care. I just wanted to start with talking about a couple of mental health care rights so that you can better advocate for yourself and kind of know some of the rights that influence your health care and getting treatment. So if you're covered by a commercial health plan in California, you do have the right to get mental health care treatments, and you have the right to get coverage for anything that's medically necessary, including inpatient and outpatient care. So inpatient, it's like you're living in a facility, and outpatient, you're out in the community and you will come to a facility to get care, and then you will leave when you're done. And you also have the right to receive care for as long as you need it. So in terms of mental health care, the extent to which you get care can't be limited. So for example, if they're like, well, if your insurance provider tells you, we'll only cover you for 10 sessions or 20 sessions, under the California Mental Health Parity Act, that's not right. You have the right to get care for as long or short as you need, depending on your needs and depending on what kind of treatment you need. And you also have the right to have your insurance arranged for out-of-network services if you can't find the right provider in network. Like for me personally, my insurance provider is Kaiser. And so right now they're currently overloaded in their in-network behavioral healthcare system. So I was waiting a long time for appointments. So I called and I said, you know, there's nothing for me in network and I'm not getting the treatment that I need in network. So they arranged for me to go out of network. So now I'm out of network and I'm covered just the same as if I was getting care in network. You also have the right to not have your benefits or coverage limited because you're entitled to receive coverage through something like Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security. And you also can't be charged more for behavioral health care services or treatment than physical health care services. So the next, we're just going to be talking about a couple of healthcare rights. So in California, you have a lot of rights as a consumer of a health insurance plan. And some of these rights include the right to get a second opinion from another doctor. So if you go to a doctor and they tell you something, and you're like, oh, I don't feel good about that. Or I would really like someone else to look this over and give their opinion. You do have the right to get a second opinion from another doctor. You also have the right to informed consent before treatment. So informed consent is when you are able to know all the facts about something before you make a decision. So consent can just be saying yes, but when you have informed consent, you know all of the facts about the decision you're going to make before you say yes. You also have the right to choose your own doctor. So if you are with a provider or a therapist or another treatment provider, and you're like, I don't really feel comfortable. I don't really like them. It can be for any reason. Or if you say, I want a doctor who understands my cultural background, or I want a doctor who is more accepting of any of my identities, or I want a doctor who makes me feel heard. You have the right to get a referral for another doctor. You don't, just because they give you a doctor doesn't mean you have to stay with that doctor forever. You have the right to kind of shop around and choose a provider that is going to best fit your needs. You also have the right to services in your own language, and you also have the right to keep your medical information private. So that's something called HIPAA. So you have the right for all of your medical information and information about your disability. If you have one, you have all of that. You have the right to have all of that information be private. And another right you have is timely access to care. So you have the right to be seen by a medical professional in a timely manner. So I have this graphic here. So if you need healthcare urgently and prior authorization is not required, you have to be seen in 2 days. And if prior authorization is required, you need to be seen in 4 days. If something you're looking for is not urgent, for a doctor's appointment, for a primary care physician, that's someone kind of like a general doctor. Like if you go get a checkup, like you would see a primary care physician, that's 10 business days. You have the right to be seen in if you're seeking a primary care physician. A specialty care physician is someone who specializes in one specific thing. For example, if you want to see a doctor that specializes in a certain condition, like someone who specializes in joints or skin conditions or stuff like that, you have the right to be seen within 15 days. For a mental health appointment that's non-physician, that would be something like a therapist. You have the right to be seen within 10 days. And for an appointment for an ancillary provider, it's 15 days. So if you have an urgent medical need and it's like, you're like, I can't make it 2 days, I need to be seen now, you can put in a request to be seen sooner. And on the flip side of that, you have the right to have your wait time extended if it's not harmful to your health, but any extension on this has to be noted in your medical record. If there are not enough providers in your area or in your network to provide timely care, your health plan must cover an appointment out of network. So that's the same like with the Mental Health Parity Act. Like if there's not enough providers in network to see you within 10 days or within 15 days, they have to cover an appointment for someone out of network. Okay, so now Lisa will talk to you guys about finding the right provider.
Sure. Thank you, Sophia. I was, in your presentation, I was just thinking about what if someone, had an accident? Obviously, they can go to the emergency room, right? So it's a question for you, Sophia.
Sorry?
I said, so let's say that someone had a very urgent issue and they had an accident, they can go to the emergency room right away, right? They wouldn't have to get pre-authorization for that, right?
Yeah, so in cases like that, you would be seen sooner. Like anything, you could have a request to be seen sooner. The timely care, I will go back. The timely access to care, this little chart here, I provided an accessible outline where I have written out the chart if this is not accessible to you. But this is specifically for making appointments. For the emergency room, you just go, you don't need an appointment. So for any emergency care, this doesn't apply. This is just like for making an appointment.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make that clear. So I want to talk about finding the right provider. Next slide, please. So let's think about what Sophia shared earlier. So let's think about preferences. Let's think about, for you, what matters to you? Does race matter? Does your sexual identity matter? Is gender a factor? Is age an important factor? These are all things that any individual can decide what is most important to them and important to also find in their provider. Next slide, please. So there are some reliable internet sites that can tell you information about the provider, like where they attended school, what specialty they have, what insurance they accept, obviously the provider's address and phone number, whether they're accepting new patients, and whether they offer telehealth, which is not having to go physically into the office and can have like video type or even Zoom meetings. So this is important. We are all different individuals and we have different needs, and that also is part of our right as a patient. And we want you to think about that. So if something is not working that is not working for you, and as Sophia provided earlier, you have a right to request another provider. And so I wanted to make sure you understood that. And next slide, please. So questions that you can ask the provider, and these are not the only questions, but these are just some examples. Like, how long have they been in practice, and what license and certifications do they have? How much do they charge? Do they have a sliding scale? What is their training in? What is their treatment philosophy? And how does your type, like my type of treatment, work? How would it work? And you have rights to ask all these questions, and sometimes you feel rushed by the provider because maybe the provider is backed up in their appointments, or maybe they had to handle an emergency and that's why they're backed up. And I'm not saying they're not justified, and they don't have a reason to be backed up and late and rushed, but you have a right as a patient to ask these questions and be comfortable with the answers. And if you don't like the answers, what can they give you as a resource to go to look up a type of treatment, to look up a type of training that you could have, or how long they've been in practice already. We did talk about that there are some sites, internet sites, where you could gain some of that information, but there's nothing like having the opportunity to have that conversation with the provider. Next slide, please. So communication style is very important in order for you to have a rapport and trust your provider, or have your provider know who you are and where you're coming from and what you desire and what your preferences are. So when you ask a question, how do they respond? That should be part of whether you gather or you assess whether they are someone you want to continue to receive treatment from. Do they welcome your questions, or they just rush you off? Do they answer in a way you understand? And do they ask you, so what do you understand from what I just told you? And what if you are a person that has a disability and you're not, let's say that you're having a hard time gather what they just said. Medical appointments are sometimes very confusing, and especially if you're feeling, a lot of us people with disabilities go to the doctor a lot and maybe have medication, and so we do have to get comfortable with explaining what's going on with us. And maybe we don't know what's going on, and that's why you go to the doctor. Well, I don't know what's going on. That's why I come to you to find out what is going on. But you want to be respected, and you want them to consider your preferences when they're choosing the treatment. And you want to know, do they respect your decision-making process? I think that is all important, because then you'll feel like you're being heard and considered, and they're taking that into account. And if a doctor is giving you a treatment plan or a suggestion or a recommendation, and they see that either you're confused or you don't agree with it, well, then they know you're not going to take their advice and do that treatment plan. So you have to have another conversation about, well, what's the alternative? Next question, please. So important things to talk about. Your fears that the treatment won't work, the importance of cultural identities. If you think treatment is not going well, when you feel uncomfortable, if they hurt your feelings, all that is important for any individual. And let's say that you're taking medication that is strong, and you're feeling like it's not working, it's making you more sick to your stomach, or you're retaining water, or something is happening that is a secondary, effect. Well, you're not going to be comfortable, and you're not going to like the treatment. And so that's why you have to weigh whether it's a good thing or it's a bad thing. Does the good benefits outweigh the bad benefits, or the side effects? And in order to know what they could be, you have to have that conversation. with the provider. Next slide, please. If you decide to see a different provider, don't stop seeing your current provider. Just tell that person, that doctor, why you are quitting, and see if you can work out the issue. If your concerns are not being addressed, then just ask for a referral for another doctor. Thank you. So we want to talk about a scenario, and I feel like I'm going fast, and I'm sorry if I'm going too fast. And if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A. So we have a scenario, and Amir is looking for a therapist. He wants a therapist who specializes in trauma and is accepting of the LGBTQ plus community and understands his cultural background. I'm going to have Sophia assist me in going through this scenario. What questions should Amir ask to potential therapists? So for Amir, if he's choosing someone new to go see that specializes in trauma, it can be somewhat tricky because they also have to take into account that the therapist has to be accepting of the LGBTQ plus community and understands his cultural background. Obviously, Amir is going to have to share, his preferences, and he's going to share, and he's going to probably, if you're in a system like Medi-Cal or Medicare, or, the Kaiser program, sometimes it's hard to, interview providers or interview therapists. And so you can look them up and research. You have anything else to add, Sophia?
No, if you wanted to put in the Q&A section, what questions you would think Amir could ask to his potential therapists, and we can go over them. Some questions you could ask or that I would think of, you can ask them what's their experiences with cultural competence. You can just ask them if they're accepting of the LGBTQ community. You can ask them what their specialization is, where they trained, if they do specialize in things like trauma. And that can be a wide range of things, like a lot of people who do trauma, they can specialize in different types of therapies like dialectical behavioral therapy, or they can do EMDR, which is eye movement, desensitization, or
Yeah, that's correct.
yeah.
So we have a few thoughts. We have a comment and a question regarding this slide. So I'm glad it sparked some brain power in here. So one comment was interviewing providers. That's actually really helpful. I would agree with that statement too. I think a lot of us just get who we get and we think we got to stick with them, right? But it is really, the patient does have a lot of power, and, why not ask the doctor a few questions, right? Interviewing the provider to make sure you're comfortable with them and make sure they're a good match, right? You want to feel comfortable and that they're listening to what you have to say, how you feel. And then the other question was, what rights do we have if they aren't accepting LGBTQ plus?
Well, you always have the right to just choose a different provider. In this case, it would be a therapist. If you're, especially for a therapist, I think it's actually encouraged to shop around, because with something like therapy, you have to be comfortable with the person you're talking to, and be able to be vulnerable with them, and that's impossible if you can't share certain parts of your identity with them. If they're not accepting, you can ask for a referral to another therapist, and then you can just tell them, like, I'm not comfortable getting care from you anymore because you're not accepting of my identity. And because I feel like, especially as youth, we think doctors are these invincible, all powerful, like all knowing people, but they're humans just like us, and they have flaws, and their feedback to them is actually helpful in informing their practice and informing their care and informing how they treat people. So perhaps giving that feedback to a therapist that's not accepting of your identities, perhaps that could motivate them to do more research into specific identities, or try to be more competent when engaging with certain identities and try to open their mind. And if not, that's fine, because you will have already moved on to a different therapist and one that you're more comfortable with. So especially with doctors, it's okay to shop around.
And I want to add that sometimes individuals with disabilities are on Medi-Cal, and maybe you've gotten a referral through the behavioral health county mental health, and it could be really tricky sometimes to get another referral. So if you're having problems in getting receiving your appropriate mental health services or any health services, that is something that we can talk to you about at DRC. So, because it's very important for you, it could be, in between a fine line between discrimination and having access to your necessary services. So we would want to know if there is something happening where we could see if there is a legal right that is being violated. And our intake line and everything will be in towards the last slides. So we'll be able to do that. So I'll turn it over to Sophia for the next session. We just broke it up in parts, and so she'll be doing the next part.
Is there another question?
There was, Sophia. I didn't want to interrupt you because we can always do those toward the end, but they did just write it, and they said, can you ask for your case notes with a therapist?
Unfortunately not. For every other provider, you can ask for your medical record. As far as you can also ask for your mental health medical record, but as far as specific session notes and what your therapist has written about what you talked about and their opinion of what's going on and stuff like that, unfortunately, that is confidential and unable to be requested. You can request your medical record. That would give you like your appointment history and stuff like that. But unfortunately, as far as therapy notes, no, that is protected, and not even you as a patient is able to ask for it.
Right, thank you.
This is Lisa. You may be able to, like, if they performed an assessment or a test or something, you should have access to those reports. But it's like we as a law office too, we have to protect our patients, or sorry, our clients, and we generate work that we're doing in any given case. And so it's confidential, and we do not have an obligation to share it because we're under the protected attorney-client privilege. So, and that product we don't provide to the client either. So, but if they write in reports and say, there's a treatment plan, you should be able to get a copy of that, because that's not That's different. It's a different type of document, but you can still contact us, and we can help you, you know, think through it and see what the law says to try and assist you.
Yeah, if it's anything like test results or specific diagnoses, that's stuff you're entitled to as part. But as far as what the therapist is writing in session, that's unfortunately not able to be accessed by the patient through a standard request, through any request. If it gets subpoenaed in court, it might get brought up, but hopefully no one will ever be in a situation where their therapy records are brought up in a court of law. So our next section is communicating with your provider. So there's 3 types of communication styles that we're going to discuss today. Here we have a picture, and it's 3 men, and one of them is looking timid, a little scared, and underneath it says passive. One guy is looking happy, and it's under it says assertive, and one guy is looking very angry, and under it says aggressive. So those are the 3 types of communication styles that we're going to be discussing today: passive, assertive, and aggressive. So when you're communicating passively, you're not expressing your feelings or needs. You're ignoring your own personal rights. You're allowing other people to make decisions for you because you don't want any conflict. And when you communicate passively, it often leads to misunderstanding, built up anger, or resentment. A case where passive communication could be helpful is if you're trying to be safe and not make sure that a conflict escalates into violence. But in the case when you're talking with your medical provider, I would say the chances of a conflict with your medical provider escalating to violence is near 0. So when we're talking about passive communication, when you're communicating with your medical provider, you're generally not going to want to communicate passively, because especially in medical environments, your needs are really important. That's what you're there for, is to get your needs met. So when you're ignoring your needs and you're not speaking up, and you're feeling really frustrated that you're not being heard and that your needs are not being met, but you're not saying anything, that's generally not going to lead to the best situation for you, because your needs are not going to get met and your doctor's not going to know what you need. So especially in a situation when you're trying to communicate with your doctor about something that you feel that they're doing wrong, or them not listening to you, or about how they don't respect a part of your identity, it can be easy to kind of default to a passive communication style. But just remember that when you're communicating passively, especially with a medical provider, you're ignoring your own feelings, needs, and personal rights. So the opposite of passive communication is aggressive communication. So that's someone who doesn't listen well, interrupts the speaker frequently, tries to dominate, criticize, blame, or attack others. It's when you're communicating and you're really frustrated and you have a low tolerance for what everyone else is saying and the opinions that everyone else is expressing. When you're communicating aggressively, you could be speaking in a really loud, demanding, and overbearing voice and acting rudely or threateningly. And then again, when you're communicating with your medical provider, you're not going to want to communicate aggressively, because when you communicate aggressively, it makes it hard for other people to work with you, especially in medical settings when you're not being listened to. Like passive communication, it can be easy to go the other way and say like, hey, you're not listening to me, and make your anger and frustration heard. But generally, aggressive communication even though you might be frustrated, or even though you have needs that need to be met, it's generally not conducive to communicate aggressively. When you communicate aggressively, people are kind of shut off to listening to you. They don't want to listen to you when you communicate aggressively with them. They generally feel really defensive, and it's generally not a way to work through.
I
Sophia,
lost
we
sound.
can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Sophia. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, we had just lost you somehow.
Okay, well, what is the last thing you heard?
You were still on this last slide.
Assertive? Okay.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so I'll start over. So assertive is kind of the happy medium between aggressive communication and passive communication. So when you communicate assertively, you have dignity and respect, self-respect. You're able to say no without feeling guilty, as well as express your feelings and ask for what you want, and kind of express your needs and your own feelings. And you're able to feel good about yourself because you didn't let yourself get walked all over, metaphorically, and you didn't let your emotions take control of yourself and get really frustrated. So you're able to feel good about how you handled the situation, knowing that you respected your own needs and that you also respected the needs of the person you're talking to. So negotiating and reaching compromises when conflict exists. In the case of your medical provider, they're there to serve you. So generally, compromises are not a thing. When you're talking to just like a friend or a peer or a parent, that's when we kind of talk about making compromises. In the case of your medical provider, they're there to help you and be of service to you. So there's no compromising when it comes to your care, but this is just general when we're talking about the communication styles. And when you're communicating assertively, you're able to make mistakes and say, hey, I slipped up, and not beat yourself up about it. And also acknowledge when you've made a mistake, or backtrack, or say, no, I've changed my mind. I don't believe that anymore. Now I want to do something else. So communicating assertively with your healthcare team, it can help you to minimize conflict and to control anger. And it can help you to take action in your treatment and communicate effectively. Because when you're communicating passively, you're not expressing your needs. And when you're communicating aggressively, you may be expressing your needs, but you're expressing your needs in a way that is not approachable to the other person. So even though you are expressing your needs, they might not be in a situation where they're best able to listen to you because of your aggressive communication style. So communicating assertively allows you to take control of your treatment and express your needs in the best way possible. It can also help you to have more positive relationships with your healthcare providers. In the case of communicating aggressively, your healthcare provider, even though they are there to serve you, might be kind of turned off from you and might not want to communicate with you if they perceive you as being aggressive. So communicating assertively can help you have a more positive relationship. I know it's tough when we're frustrated in healthcare settings, and I know it can seem hard to say, to kind of put yourself in the healthcare provider's shoes and want to make it as easy as possible for them. But making things easy for them and communicating best for them. Just think of it as it making it easier for you and making it easier for you to get your needs met. So this all leads us to the conclusion of speaking up if you don't feel heard. So advocating for yourself in healthcare settings is really important, because when we're talking about our health, it's really important to advocate for ourselves. If we're saying, hey, I do not feel right, I really want treatment, I feel like something's wrong. So if you're not feeling heard, or you feel like your doctor is misunderstanding you, you can say something like, no, what I'm saying is, like, oh, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. Like, this is what I actually mean. Which brings us to a scenario. Layla wakes up one day with a lot of pain in her joints. She goes to the doctor, who tells her that there is nothing to worry about and that she should just go home and rest. Layla is in a lot of pain, and she feels like her doctor is not listening to her. How should Layla advocate for herself in this situation? So just from what we've learned so far, if you want to put in the Q&A section what you would do if you were Layla.
And Aubrey, let us know when there's something that you want to share that people have inserted or written into the Q&A.
Absolutely. We haven't gotten anything new yet. So yeah, if you do think back to their presentation, thinking about if your doctor's not listening to your needs, what can you do? As a patient, think about some of those ideas that Lisa and Sophia talked about. Someone did just now say, be firm. Absolutely. Be firm, maybe state again what you need, right? If you don't feel like you got heard the first time, stating it again. Tell them to put my records. They aren't doing what I asked. Yeah, good. Very good. Anything else in the Q&A? Feel free to pop it in. This is the time. I did have a question, as you ladies were presenting, and I wanted to ask because I think, you guys made the point that, if you're not comfortable with your provider or with your doctor, that you can ask for a referral, right? But what if it got to the point where you feel like your doctor, said something discriminatory towards you, and you feel that, not only do you want another doctor, but you also want to file a complaint? How would someone go about filing a complaint against a provider that they feel, maybe offended them in some way?
So what would be important is to know what type of discrimination the individual's identifying with. So was it related to race? Was it related to gender? Was it related to a protected class? Or is it related to that provider's opinion about you as an individual? So there are different ways of looking at it. And so the assessment on what you could do to file a complaint and where you would file a complaint, because general medical complaints can be placed with the medical board. But if you want something specific, because maybe that doctor has a specialty, then you may need more counseling to identify what's the best avenue to use. Sophia?
Yeah, so you can file a complaint with your state's medical board. For that, you would need the license of the doctor who's treating you. If you are in a situation where you feel like you've been discriminated against, it's really important to document it in whatever way you can. So if there's any messages or electronic communications, print those out. If it's something that happened verbally, right after it happens, try to write it down and have a written, or I mean, you can just type it up in your notes app or on a Google Docs or Google Drive, or in a notebook if you would like. Try to be as detailed as possible. Try to include the date, the name of the person who discriminated against you, where it happened, all of the context, what exactly was said, who might have overheard it, or any witnesses that you think might have been present in the situation, just so that you go into that situation with as much proof of as possible. If there's an issue with you getting timely care or your healthcare rights being violated, you can file for an independent medical review. Although if you are on Medicaid or Medicare, you would not be able to do that. But if you're on if you're a consumer of a private health plan, you can file an independent medical review, and you can also file a consumer complaint. If you do have a complaint against a specific doctor, the medical board would be the best way to handle that.
Awesome. We've got a couple more questions. Of course, they're coming in right at the last couple minutes here. So I'll just go ahead and read them aloud. The first one was actually responding to the scenario for Layla. So if I were Layla, I would tell my doctor by urging and strongly convincing them in a good way that I really need help to let them get rid of the pain in my hips and let them know how else I can prevent that from happening. Absolutely. And then we do have a question. Could you file a complaint to your doctor if you are sexually harassed?
Do you mean sexually? If you're sexually harassed by your doctor, you can file a complaint with the medical board. If you're sexually harassed by another person, just like outside of the medical field, your doctor would not be the best person to file that complaint. Generally with sexual harassment, you want to file the complaint in the setting in which it occurred. So if it's in an educational setting, going to whatever party in the educational setting handles sexual harassment complaints. If it's in a medical setting, for example, the medical board would be able to handle that. It depends the extent of the sexual harassment. Like if it's sexual assault and if you wanted to report it, law enforcement would be the best way to handle that.
Thank you very much. And that's the last question that we had in the Q&A.
Okay, excellent.
So the next we just want to share some resources with you guys and our intake line as well, number.
First, these are some self-advocacy resources. If you request the accessible outline for this presentation, you'll be able to get all these links. You don't have to worry about writing them down. These are just general resources about self-advocacy. And we do other webinars at DRC. And this is the link. Again, it's in the accessible outline.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to launch the poll. Advocating for your healthcare. Launching it. All right. Same 4 questions.
Lisa, do you want to go over the number?
I just wanted them to finish the polling, so.
Oh yeah, no problem.
About 10 more seconds and I'll close the poll.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All righty.
Okay, well, so the poll is done. I just want to thank you guys and thank everyone for coming. As a reminder, please join in on the last session of the virtual resource fair happening today at 3:30 through 5:30 p.m. To close us out today, I will be giving you guys a Chloe's Care Corner tip today. So it is to actually get more sleep because sleep is so important and it helps you stay awake longer. It can boost your mood, especially if you have a set sleep schedule. It can just overall make you less moody, make you more awake, and it has a lot of benefits for your overall body. So definitely get some more sleep. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.